Stadium events are a big deal in esports and always have been, particularly stadium events that take place in recognizable stadiums, ones with big names like Madison Square Garden, the Barclays Center, ones that people have heard of before. These are seen as a sign of esports entrance to the mainstream, to popular culture, to the masses actually being interested and wanting to attend, and these being sporting or competitive disciplines along the lines of traditional sports, the big sports of each of the countries. And so people think when they see esports in big stadiums, this means esports has arrived. It's part of the mainstream. It's just as legitimate as another sport. It carries all these connotations with it and all these judgments, and that's why so much importance is placed upon it by people within esports. And in that sense, it's a kind of a status symbol in this very respect. We see people even planning it into future esports and where they think the industry will go. So with Blizzard's Overwatch League, they've even floated with how they're going to franchise the league, the notion that it'll be a regional teams model, that they're going to go, as with sports in pretty much every country, where there'll be a home stadium for a particular team and they'll have regular fans who attend there. Now, the big problem with this is the timeline of thinking that we're already there, that these things will continue, that they'll only get bigger, and that the next jump up is to be like real sports and have these huge stadium events, but on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, because there are so many assumptions coupled into this that just do not bear out if you actually look around the world of esports. So first and foremost, there's the assumption that esports is so huge that it can regularly pack out huge venues. Now, that has simply not been proven on any kind of reasonable scale or with any regularity. It only actually vaguely applies if you literally consider esports to be every possible electronic game that is played under ESL and MLG and OGN and Blizzard and Riot Games, every single esports game in the whole world. Then you are fairly regularly getting big venues packed out. But that's not the way that people are selling it. People are saying this within each game, that like CSGO can have all these huge stadium events all the time. League of Legends can have huge stadium events all the time. Dota 2 can have them all. And that's what people are trying to sell. Overwatch can have regional teams that will regularly have fans attending in their stadium to watch the big games. Obviously, that wouldn't be like a literally the same size as a Madison Square Garden. But even so, this notion that you can have this regular model on a small scale and on the large scale where you could sell out these massive areas. The problem with that is the only examples we tend to see so far in general are when you have a really big event. Now, particularly like a world championship, like the final of a massive event. So like a Worlds for League of Legends, basically the equivalent of a World Cup or of a Super Bowl type scenario. Then yes, you can sell out a big stadium, even a big name one that everyone knows about. So if you have the League of Legends World Championship, if you have the Dota 2's International, if you have a CSGO Major, then in general, yeah, you probably can get a big stadium and sell it out. But even then, not necessarily in the same way as sports do. I mean, a lot of the stadiums, for example, actually only sell out half the seats because the way they set up the stage, they can only half of them can see the screen. Whereas in real sports, it's the whole stadium, all circular, most of them are built, that gets sold out. So you're not even selling out that full stadium as it is. Secondly, there have been numerous CSGO majors, for example, that did not do insane numbers. I mean, Cluj-Napoca didn't sell out all its seats, didn't have all the bums in seats in that crowd. There have been many past majors where actually tickets were free and they still only had low thousands or hundreds of fans at any one time watching the games. You also see other events that aren't on this scale that haven't always worked out, like IEM Oakland, right until the bitter end. You saw that whole kerfuffle with ESL where they basically just gave away thousands of tickets in a box and later on claimed there was some sort of coupons, but clearly they didn't sell out the seats. And they were just trying to get anyone in there at that point in time, even though in some sense you could say that invalidate the people who paid already, but that's just the way they were trying to do it. IEM Oakland had issues in this sense. One of the reasons why I'm very skeptical that esports is even vaguely at this level, or that it necessarily can be, is because the model for successful esports, if we think about it, what's the one country that's really succeeded in esports? At making it mainstream, and making it part of their culture, and at making it about as big as you could scale it within their population size. It's Korea, right? South Korea. Now, in South Korea, we know during the mid-2000s, StarCraft Brood War was huge. There was 2 TV channels dedicated to showing not only all the live matches, but then other programming around it, talk shows, analysis, even fun shows where celebrities played the game. They had all this stuff, TV channels. To this day, they still have a TV channel. On GameNet, it still exists, and it still shows the games from League of Legends and now Overwatch. And we know that numbers of people playing in Korea, proportionate to how many people they have, are insanely high. More people play ranked in South Korea in League of Legends than play in all of North America, the region. And yet there's way more people live in North America, probably way more gamers overall. And yet massive amounts of people playing ranked. So they've got the TV channels, got the infrastructure, they've got massive companies on the biggest level involved in gaming for years and years, a decade or more. They've got the numbers of people playing them. And yet, in general, they only pack out grand finals for their huge stadium events. In fact, that's the only time they attempt huge stadium events in general. When they have their league games, even when their league games are big matches in the league, they just have them within a studio setting where there'll be a few hundred people sat on cheap plastic lawn chairs. And this is despite the fact they have these huge playing numbers, this huge infrastructure, this huge demand, people watching on television, and they're in a city of 10 million people and it's very dense and has fantastic transport. And yet they aren't selling out every week. They aren't having this regional success. They aren't having massive fan appeal in terms of going and witnessing the live event. Now, one of the reasons as to why in the West I think this is an issue is because the cost of attending these events in a massive stadium like a Madison Square Garden can be like $70, can be like $100. Now, sure, you get 2 or 3 days or more enjoyment out of that, but that cost, not in a relative manner, just directly compared to the cost of other live entertainment, going to a sports game, going to theatre, watching a live band, this can sometimes be prohibitive. This can be right up there. It can be pretty high up. You can even contrast it with something that's not necessarily live entertainment in the same sense. A movie is significantly less than $70 or $100. Now, you get less time out of it, but even so, the way people traditionally think of it is different in this particular sense. In fact, the fact you have to go for longer means you add in more costs and more aspects of it, having to stay overnight and all this sort of things. So one of the flaws, I think, of the concept of the live experience naturally blowing up and scaling up in a way that has happened in other sports is that when you go to esports events, you are still watching the game itself on a screen. It's just a massive screen. So the problem there is the difference between the live experience in terms of what you see with your eyes is actually not very much. And in fact, it very well might be better to be sat at home watching on stream. Now, sure, you get to see the players in the booth. Sure, you get the excitement of the crowd. You get all that. But it's not quite the same as physically with your eyes seeing that person perform that incredible bicycle kick goal or whatever, or slam dunk or something like this that you get in real sports. You don't have that. You still see it happen on the screen, the actual action of the game, in the same way someone at Twitch would, except the screen's further away from you and it's just a really big screen. So that's a flaw, I think, in the concept right there. Also, you tend to have to announce months in advance and gather people from all over country and all over continents to get people to fill up these massive stadium events. Well, that's not what's happening. There are, 20,000, 30,000 people go to each Laker game, each of the 82 Laker games in the regular season, even when they're a bad team. There are people who go there again and again. Those tickets can, at the courtside level, run up into thousands of dollars as a result, because there's so much demand for it. Esports is not even vaguely in the same ballpark right now. You've also got to consider other flaws, which is that teams change rosters very rapidly in esports in comparison to other teams. So, for example, if you follow a team from your local area, if they're bad for 1 year, you kind of tuned out. And when you tune back in, all your experience watching most of the roster and learning who the new players are and seeing them develop, etc., it's all still there. There's still some thread to pick up. Teams change rosters far more often in esports, especially star players. Usually star players stay put for a while, like 5 or 6 years. That doesn't happen in esports. These players are gone in a year. I mean, think about it. Flusher was one of the stars of Fnatic. JW, one of the stars of Fnatic. Crim's one of the stars of Fnatic at different points in time. All gone. In-game leader of Fnatic, gone. They don't spend their whole careers there. There's not the same continuity. And by the way, I don't think there should be. I think that's one of the cool things about esports is how short-lived teams can be, but how special they can be, and how we make changes and we don't doom franchises like the Atlanta Hawks in the late 2000s to just having like the sixth best team in the NBA for like 4 years and as a result never going far. We do blow it up. We do try again. We do try to get to the top and be number one. I love that. But you probably need these things in place to have this sports aspect. Now, I don't think you should do that. I don't think this is necessarily the case. I think something different than sports, and it's kind of naive to think that we should crowbar it, force it awkwardly into that model. So one of the points, and this is a point I made a number of years ago, if you remember, was that when IEM was bragging about having these events in Katowice in Poland, which, by the way, is not even, as far as I know, a top 2 or 3 city in Poland, they were doing it in large part, they were presenting it as like, look, we pack out these stadiums, this incredible spectacle, like eSports has arrived, look how mainstream it is. And yet, as I said, it wasn't even the capital of Poland. The tickets were actually free for the majority of people who wanted to enter. The stadium was provided with some sort of a deal quite clearly by the local city. That's why it was held in this particular city, and they're not even a main city of that particular country. And as a result, to cut costs, the country itself was not in the same position in terms of massive levels of entertainment that you'd get if you were in somewhere like Oakland, etc., or New York or Los Angeles or one of these sorts of places. You don't have as much access, you don't have the same sort of disposable income in the same sense. So yeah, people were ahead of the curve in terms of jumping on this bandwagon years ago, and it's not that the bandwagon has caught up; it hasn't caught up yet, and they're still ahead of it, hyping it even more and more and more. So esports is not at the stage yet that people try to make out it is, and it's not even necessarily given that it ever will be. Maybe sure, the international worlds will be like Super Bowl level events, and they'll be super huge, and people want to attend just because how special it was. But will they always want to attend an IEM Oakland? Will they want to attend the first round of the playoffs of an LCS game? Will they want to attend, the 11th biggest Dota 2 tournament in the world? Doesn't seem like it at the moment. And there's not really that many reasons as to why you'd have to attend them, because, like I say, there's not the same special natural aspect of seeing it with your own eyes. You're still watching it on screen to some extent.